Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Dellera. This episode is once again brought to you by our good friends at Rhythm. Rhythm is the number one AI betting tool that you need to have, not only at your disposal, but just on your phone too. You can use the app, you can use the desktop, you can get live player prop projections, you can get spreads, totals, money lines, etc. And it gives you an edge in terms of whether or not you should or shouldn't bet that based on the way that your model is performing. And you can get that for a free week on me or for 25% off your first month with the links in the bio. Additionally, you guys should consider joining the huddle. It's a new year, new me. Let's make some more bets. Let's make some more money. And look, the huddle, the biggest thing about it is that you get our plays first, and you're always going to be able to get them at the best lines. Last night, we cashed Trae Young over 11.5 assists. The line, like, you wound up cashing every number, right? The key here, though, is we got 11.5 at plus 100. This wound up closing at over 12.5. So you get that type of edge. And a lot of times when you're saying, oh, like I lost by the hook or yada, 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 we're not, because we're getting the best lines right away. And you can get that for a couple days for free on me with the link in the bio here as well. And be sure to like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell everybody to subscribe to the Cash That podcast. All right, so let's get into the Wednesday betting slate. I'm a little under the weather, so I'm going to try to keep this fast. 33 was yesterday, so it hits me a little bit differently now, but a little tired. We got to do what we got to do. But at the same time, we are going to lock in, obviously, and get you the plays, get you the best bets. The first game that we're going to talk about is literally the best game on the slate. It's one of the best games of the season, and that is the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder are on the road against the Cleveland Cavaliers here. The biggest thing for me when I'm looking at this game is it's the first time, I think, in NBA history they said that two teams with basically double-digit win streaks are playing each other. The Cavs are at 10 games, the Thunder at 15. The 15 is a little funky because they obviously lost in the in-season tournament final. But at the same time, that game doesn't count for the standings, doesn't count for any stats, whatever. So they're saying it's a 15-game winning streak. Oh yeah, check out my sticker. It's great. Anyway, so when we're looking at this game, one of the biggest issues for me with Oklahoma City, and it's one of the concerns that I have just with them generally, is they don't really take a ton of threes, right? And I think that that's fine, right? Like, it's not the end of the world, but they allow a ton of threes, and specifically they allow things from the corner. So I'm going to like things for Dean Wade and Georges Niang, probably their threes prop or their points prop. It kind of depends on where it comes out. 5.5 would be a really nice number for either of them, and I'm going to be on the lookout for that. We'll see what kind of like the 1.5 threes looks like too. Essentially, those guys just take the bulk of their shots from the corner, so I want to try to take advantage of that. From a ball perspective, though, and from looking at this game overall, in terms of adjusted net rating on the season, the Oklahoma City Thunder are number one. They're plus 9.7, number 9 in offense, number 1 in defense. Cleveland is third, plus 7.8, second in offense, 10th in defense. And when we get and we look kind of on a little bit more of a granular level in terms of the way that they score, Cleveland has been exceptional from beyond the arc. And this is the difference, really, I think, between them and Boston, even to a degree, right? And even New York, because New York has an excellent three-point shooting percentage, but they don't take a lot of threes. Boston takes a shitload of threes, but they're about league average from beyond the arc. And when we look at Cleveland, they take the 7th highest frequency of threes, but they have the number 1 three-point percentage in the league at 40.4%. Looking at Oklahoma City, they don't take a ton of threes. They generate a good amount of contact, so they're getting to the free throw line a lot. But on the defensive side of the ball, they allow the highest frequency of threes in the NBA. Granted, they defend them at the best rate in the league, and that contributes to their number 1 adjusted defensive rating as well. For me, looking at what's going on here, and if you kind of compare it to the Boston game, right, and even the New York game, both of those teams came out hot. They won the first half. And then you're in the situation in the second half where the defense of Oklahoma City really clamps down. And they started changing things stylistically. They put in the Boston game, they wound up putting Lou Dort on Jaylen Brown after Jaylen Brown had that huge first half. And the physicality was significantly higher in like the effort from Oklahoma City. And if the refs are going to allow that, then it creates the situation where a lot of these other teams aren't used to playing with that level of physicality because number one, you're going to get called for fouls a lot of the time. And then number two, like you don't really run into teams that are going to play like that regardless. So if the refs aren't going to call the fouls, then it's not going to go so well for Oklahoma City or for whoever they're playing rather. If they are going to call fouls, then it's going to be a little bit more of a problem for Oklahoma City. At the same time, Oklahoma City has great defenders. They don't need to rely on fouling in terms of their physical defense. They can still be extremely physical without fouling and make some of these looks a lot tougher. The rotations are tighter and they have so many wings that everybody seems to be fresh. So even though, we're dealing with this really long stretch for them, this win streak, they aren't playing their guys extended minutes. Like nobody's playing a shitload of minutes where you're saying, man, like they really should give this guy a rest. And I think that matters. And I think that it also shows the fact that they're not really doing anything super different. They're not going out of their game plan. They're not trying to do anything differently. And that's what gives me a little bit of pause in this game where, like, to me, I think Oklahoma City is susceptible to the three ball still. And New York and Boston, who Oklahoma City just beat recently, the difference is that, like I said, Boston takes a lot of threes, but they're not necessarily as high of a caliber or as high of a quality as they normally would want. And they just have everybody shooting threes. New York doesn't take a lot of threes, but they have a higher 3-point shooting percentage. Here with Cleveland, it's really both. You're getting the volume and you're getting the efficiency. And that's where I think maybe Cleveland kind of hit this button that becomes a problem for Oklahoma City. So I'm really excited for this game. I'm really curious to see what this game is. I think that right now, from a betting perspective, I would want Oklahoma City plus 2.5. I think that this game should really probably be like a pick 'em. I think these teams are even. I would probably give Oklahoma City maybe like a slight edge. But from a stylistic perspective, I'm curious to kind of see how it goes. If one of these teams gets up big, maybe double digits like early or something like that, I would probably be looking to buy the other side. I think that both teams can generate enough offense quickly that this is going to be a pretty tight game. And there may be some ebbs and flows as well. From a player prop perspective, one of the player props that I'm looking at is Jalen Williams under 20.5 points. The biggest thing is that he takes mostly mid-range shots, and the Cavs defend pretty much everything from the three-point line in very well. He just isn't hitting the number. He's 1 for 10 over his last 10 games, averaging 17.7 points. And on the season, he's 14 for 36, averaging 20.5. So right on this number. And when I consider the fact that I think he might have a pretty tough matchup if Evan Mobley's covering him for a bulk of the game, that's not great for him. And I think that this is going to be a tougher matchup for him. I think it's a little bit of a better matchup for Shea, who has scored 32 points in really 5 of his last 7 games. Last year, he scored 34 and 43 against Cleveland. So I do think that this is a tougher spot for Jalen Williams, a little bit of a better matchup for Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. So take that of what you will, right? If I had to pick, I think that Oklahoma City is better. I do think that Cleveland's style of ball could cause some problems, though, for Oklahoma City. I really wouldn't be surprised, obviously, like if either team was able to win this game, which isn't really the most exciting type of commentary there, but I do think that it is the most reasonable, or so to speak, in terms of what I'm seeing and what I'm looking at for this game. Next game we'll talk about briefly, Knicks versus the Raptors. Obviously, you have a variety of different players playing their former teams. From a revenge perspective, I don't know. I mean, OG's pretty happy to be in New York, quickly got paid. Barrett's at home, so I'm not super worried about that, right? Barrett, though, I will say he has played well against New York. His PRA line is at 20, or his PA line is at, let's look, his points line's at 19.5, assists at 4.5, rebounds at 5.5. Against New York, he's averaging 24, 7, and like 4.7. So I think that if I was looking at an RJ Barrett prop, I would probably just go to the rebounds at 5.5. It's pretty juiced at like minus 160 right now. But he's hit that in all 3 games against New York with 8, 8, and 6. Even over the course of the entire season, he's hitting this at 75% of the time. So I do think that there's some opportunity there for Barrett as a rebounder. And whenever you're getting up more a little bit or you're trying a little bit harder, I feel like the rebounds tend to come. I do think that rebounds are an effort-based stat, and when you're playing a team that maybe you want to try to show them something, the rebounds are going to pop a lot of times. On the Knicks side, Karl-Anthony Towns obviously missed last game. He's on the report for this game. We'll see if he plays. I know that the knee was kind of a little bit of an issue. It's interesting looking at the player props because Brunson's at 26.5 right now, which is a little bit high for him, especially like it almost seems to infer that Cat might not play. But even last game without Cat, he only scored 24. He got poked in the eye a little bit. So that was a little bit of an issue, obviously, for him. But for Towns, I'd be looking at his assist line is at 3.5. He has hit that in 6 of his last 10 games. And both games this season against Toronto was 6 and 7. I would even consider, honestly, his PA at 29.5. He's had 30 and 38 PA against the Toronto Raptors. And the Raptors have been pretty weak towards opposing centers. Although the rebounding has been there with Pirtle. I do think if I had to go anyway, though, I would lean the assists. But we'll kind of see how the injury report shakes out. I'm curious to see who's available for New York. The Bulls and the Pacers, not the most interesting game here, honestly. I think that if you're going to look at anything, maybe some Zach LaVine. I know Duncan Threes has this game set at the Pacers 123 to the Bulls 118. So it's a 5-point game. I think this is about right. I'm going to look at the Sixers versus the Wizards. Sixers are 10.5-point favorites without Paul George and Joel Embiid. And the number one bet that I'm going after is Tyrese Maxey under 8.5 assists, minus 135. Sent that out. It's on Bet365 and on Caesars at minus 137. Sent that out to the Discord, sent that out to the Dub Club. So make sure you join because you're going to get some of these lines. But I just think this is a complete overreaction to 10 dimes last game without Paul George and Embiid. He only had 14 potentials. So it's just an above average conversion rate. And I know that Washington is bad. They allow a ton of assists, but I think this number is just too high for a score first player. Without Embiid and without Paul George, he's just 1 for 9 on this line this season. And even last season, he was only 5 for 32. So to me, the number is just too high. The problem is too, the players that have to convert on the assists are not like super talented offensive scorers here. I understand that Washington is not a good basketball team, especially in terms of the assists that they allow. But without Paul George or Embiid, I do think that Washington's going to have a little bit better time on defense. I think that this is going to be a spot where Alex Sarr is impactful. I kind of like him over 11.5 points if that's available. 12.5 is probably okay too, but I might just look for like the threes at 1.5. So I'll kind of dig into that a little bit more tomorrow. But I just think, again, that this line is just too high. So I would take under 8.5. Last game, it was 6.5 to put it in perspective. So it was 6.5 last game when he had 10. And then now we're going to do a 2 assist jump up to 8.5. I just think the number's too high. I'm willing to lose it and be wrong here on the fact that I just think it's too high of a line for Tyrese Maxey. The Pistons and the Nets are 7.5-point underdogs. The Pistons, I think, are finally 500 now again. So that's awesome for them. Jalen Duren's been really good against Nick Claxton. 13 points, 12 boards, 3 assists on a slash line in, I think it was 6 head-to-head games against Nick Claxton. So definitely could look at a Duren prop there. His minutes have been a little wonky this year. The rotations have been a little tough for him, but I do think that this is still a matchup that he could really thrive in. And looking at the injury report, Brooklyn is just an absolute dumpster fire. Brooklyn is saying that Simmons is questionable, D'Angelo Russell's ruled out, Trenton Watford still isn't playing, Cam Johnson still isn't playing, Cam Thomas still isn't playing, Bojan Bogdanovic still not playing. So they're really, really thin right now. And I do think that if Simmons is able to play, this might be a game to look for maybe like an assist prop or a rebounds prop, just because you don't have D'Lo, you don't have Watford. But from an overall player prop perspective for this game, it's tough because you're looking at a situation where you don't have like a real primary ball handler. I know that Keon Johnson was somebody that people were looking at last game. Assist line set at 3.5. He had 5 assists last game. The potentials, and he had 8 the game before against Philly. But at the same time, if Simmons comes back, they're just not going to need that. And I feel like the way that this line is set right now, it's set in a way where if Simmons comes back, then you're toast, and they're probably not going to take a ton of action on an under here. And it's a little bit too risky to probably go under, like in the event that Simmons doesn't play. So I would definitely consider that. And then from a Detroit perspective, besides that, I think that you could maybe look at Cade Cunningham over 9.5 assists, or even probably 9.5 assists, or even the RA. He's at 15.5 RA. For the 9.5, always obviously check and make sure the double price isn't better or worse or whatever. Brooklyn tends to allow a ton of assists to lead point guards or lead guards, and just in general. So I do think that this is a spot where, given that Brooklyn's so banged up, this may be an opportunity for Cade to really kind of rack up the dimes, get Detroit an easy win. He's been at 9 past couple, but I do think that maybe he's able to crack through in this next game. It's 9.5, it's juiced, but some of the underdogs, the sleepers, were fetching like 10.5s for him. So definitely something to keep an eye on. The Blazers and the Pelicans play. Pelicans on a back-to-back. Zion, I would be shocked if he plays in this game, but Zion does make this Pelicans team so much better. And, when he does those fun, windmill reverse dunks, whatever, you see all the talent that's there. You see why he's such an exciting player to back, to root for, to watch. And, it's unfortunate that he's struggled to stay on the floor, but at the same time, maybe we'll get to see him. Maybe we'll get to see him play here. I would be looking at DeJounte Murray, his points line. I'm fetching a bunch of things between like 16.5 to 18.5. I just think this is a really soft matchup for him against the Portland Trailblazers. So I would be looking for DeJounte Murray. Also, obviously, CJ McCollum goes back, he plays the Blazers, and he always kind of balls out a little bit. So his line is about like 20.5 or so, and I would definitely be considering that as well. The Blazers are just a sieve to lead guards. So those are some of the spots that I would consider against the Portland Trailblazers in this game on Wednesday night. Next, the Clippers and the Nuggets. Maybe no Jokic. Jokic didn't play tonight against the Boston Celtics. He was sick. Aaron Gordon's still not back for Denver. It's possible that all of them are back, and Jokic and Aaron Gordon come back for the Wednesday game. It's a little hard to tell. The spread's kind of moved towards the Clippers. The Nuggets are +1. Have to see where this kind of ends up, but Kawhi is back. Kawhi, I would expect him to play. We don't have any player prop set for this game, probably because of the Jokic illness, Aaron Gordon's status being in flux. But Kawhi being back is significant. I think it makes this Clippers team much better. We'll have to see just exactly how limited he is again. One of the things that I am looking for, though, I'm curious to see where his threes prop is. He has been taking a little bit more threes, and I do think that a lot of it has to do with the knee, with the leg, with the lower body issues, that maybe he's going to take some more threes. He's a good 3-point shooter, and try to take off some of the load that he was carrying on the interior when he's attacking the rack, when he's getting in the mid-range, when he's getting rebounds. So that's something that I'm going to be looking for. For the Spurs and the Bucks are 5-point favorites. I like Giannis over 27.5 points. He had 44 against Wemby last year, and Wemby is so much better, obviously. Still prone to fouls, and that's something that Giannis just generates endlessly. So I do think that Giannis over 27.5 points is a good look, and I'm going to be on that in this game, again, for the Spurs and the Bucks. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, though, now we're finished with the slate. The other day we hit the Austin Reeves prop, and that was awesome. We got the 10 and the 8, we got the 65-1, like whatever. We took the boost, it gets up to 75-1 or 77-1, whatever it was. It's going to be interesting to see what defenses do, and I think it's part of why the Lakers are still not necessarily done making moves. But when the Mavericks played the Lakers on Tuesday night, in the second half, they fucking spammed Austin Reeves and ISO nonstop. And you just can't let that happen if you're the Lakers. You have to do something to fix it, because you can't make Austin Reeves can't be unplayable to you. So I do think that that's going to be something that I want to keep an eye on and see exactly how much teams are doing that. But if there are teams that are able to generate like strong ISO ball or like pick and roll then that's going to be a spot where you may and like that they can kind of generate and put Austin Reeves into action. There's going to be some availability for player props, whether it's points or whether it's assists, to kind of back teams playing the Lakers, at least for the near future, just because that's the way that they decided to attack them defensively. And it might also change some of the rotations defensively for the Lakers to see if you have Reeves on the floor, who needs to come onto the floor to kind of help the defense and help shore up the back end. So I'm curious to see how that goes. I wanted to talk about a little bit of stuff with awards. So awards, the market tends to be very reactionary. And the idea, in my opinion, is that you want to be a little bit ahead of the curve. So I know that there's a lot of conversation about like holds in awards markets, and I agree the holds are generally a little bit higher. But it's funny because I complained about this at some point for like player props, and I was like, well, like the holds are higher for player props, like minus 115 on both sides. And people were like, oh, that's normal, blah, blah, blah. Like they're easier to beat, whatever. It's like same fucking thing for futures, I think, especially the awards market. I think that like if you're betting the Super Bowl or you're betting the NBA title or something like that, it's a little bit of a different scenario because there's only like one winner and it's based on what happens on the court. When you're betting on awards, a lot of it has to do with the way that people think and some of the data that they use and the points that they're working with, right? So if you are looking at Rookie of the Year, a couple weeks ago, I gave out, when Jared McCain got hurt, I gave out Zach Edey 55-1 to win Rookie of the Year. He's like bouncing around at the favorite or the second favorite now, a couple weeks later. But part of my thought process was the guy's been out and people always kind of revert to their priors. Like they revert to what they wanted to be right with in the first place. And it's not an award that's based 100% on what you do on the court. It's based off of what people perceive and the way that people are going, and then how are people going to vote for that, right? So people, number one, always want to be right. And number two, they always are going, like, number two, like they're going to be reactionary. They're going to think about, how does this impact the things that I've already thought about or the things that I've already put out there? And for a guy like Edey, to me, looking at that, I was like, all right, well, he was the preseason favorite. He's 55-1. McCain's out. I think this is a weak rookie class. Like, why would we not go back there? Now, Alex Sarr is rising in the ranks too. Had a bad game on Tuesday night. But at the same time, top of the draft, somebody that was perceived to maybe be the number one pick or a potential number one pick, right? Has a ton of raw skill, length, defensive stats, whatever. He's on a Washington team that's pretty bad, but also may even be shedding some more players, so he might even get more opportunity. And people are like, oh yeah, like Alex Sarr, like that makes sense. It's so much harder to crack through as another candidate when people are so fixated on like, these are the people. And it doesn't matter what you do unless you're so transcendent, like the way McCain was, where he was so good that people said like, this, it has to be him. Like he's been incredible, right? Even right now, like if you look at the Sixth Man of the Year award, like Peyton Pritchard has not been as good lately. He started the season off incredibly hot. He's a consensus favorite now for the award. And it's basically gotten to a point now where he's just not as good. He just hasn't been as good now. Maybe he will come around, but I don't know if he should necessarily be favorited right now. But people are stuck in it and they're just like, no, like that's it. He's done. The word's over. And that creates value for us as bettors because the market is shaped in a way where people then are like putting those favorites, like the guys that can't lose, the race is over, start putting them in parlays. They start putting them in, start putting in huge bets on them because they're like, this has to hit. This has to hit, right? And we're too early in the season. There's too many things that can happen. And as a result of that, it's giving opportunity because the odds get longer down the board to create a position where you're betting on some longer shots because the favorite is overpriced. It's mispriced. I think there is sometimes where you can look at it and be like, no, this is it. These are the people. These are the candidates, like especially with MVP, because it's a totally different threshold in terms of who's even really in the conversation. And it's maybe only like 2, 3, maybe 4 players a year. Whereas with some of these other ones, like Sixth Man of the Year or Most Improved, Defensive Player of the Year, and other years, maybe a little bit less this year, they get so locked down, or there's so many more candidates, right, in some of those awards, that there is a little bit more flexibility. Whereas with MVP, it's basically like, if you're not like the best player in the league, or at least up for that conversation, like, you're not winning this award. And I think that that's important. And I just think that there's a lot of opportunity in betting these awards, because you're not really, it's not so much that you're betting on like the team's performance in the long run. You're not betting on like the on-court aspect of it 100% anyway. You're betting on the way that people think and the way that people will vote. And I think that that's an important distinction with the awards markets versus the like general futures market, saying like, this team's going to win the division, or this team's going to win the conference, or this team's going to go over their win total, because it's not about raw like outputs. It's about the way that people are going to craft their opinions and the groupthink that's associated with it, and why those things can swing so dramatically. And because of that, you're able to extract a lot more value from some of those awards markets. All right, so that's that. And now for pods and recs, like I said, I'm not feeling great. I am going to recommend, if you could see, this is not an ad. I wish I was sponsored by Vicks, but I love these like Vicks Vapo inhalers, and they really just help open you up. It's fantastic. Big fan, and I am going to recommend a Vicks Vapo inhaler. So if you are trying to, stay up, stay clean, make sure that you are able to fully breathe, make sure you get one of these. It's great. And continue to use it, obviously, while you're prepping your sports betting. And make sure that you download Rhythm. This podcast is brought to you by our good friends at Rhythm. And get that on your app, get that on the phone, get that on the desktop. You can have it with you wherever you go, to make sure that you are backed by the data and backed by the modeling that you can create yourself. You can influence it yourself to figure out what you put in, the outputs that you think are important. And then that can spit out a model, and you can track it and see exactly how it's doing. And you don't have to deal with all the math on the back end. You can let Rhythm handle that for you, and they will tell you and track it and tell you just how good your model is performing. So appreciate you guys. Keep up, keep inhaling, keep Vapo inhaling, and let's continue to cash that.